he called the NRA and he said, I believe this is a violation and I want to sue the federal government. And he said, the NRA said, we've been praying for you. He wanted a lawyer. He got his own lawyer with the help of the NRA. He got his own lawyer, and he will tell you that he filed the only suit against Bill Clinton ever filed that was non-sexual in nature. Story, I thought it was a Second Amendment case. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. Sheriff Richard Mack, another David fighting an even bigger Goliath, won before the U.S. Supreme Court. But he said to me, Deborah, that wasn't a Second Amendment case. That was a 10th Amendment case.
Yes, it was.
Anthony Scalia held in that case the federal government has no authority to tell officers of the state what to do. Don't be fooled that nullification imposition doesn't work in our lifetime. That was 1997. It was a 10th Amendment case won in the Supreme Court. I called the Attorney General's office to talk to them about health care and what we were doing on health care, and they said they're looking. They are looking, they're waiting for the legislation. They cannot drop a brief until the legislation is signed, but they're studying the legislation. They're looking for legal arguments to make in defense of Texas on that bill. But Deborah, while your nullification and interposition speech is a good campaign stump, honey, you've got to understand that we've got 150 years of case law that says the states cannot stand up to the federal government. And I said, when was the 10th Amendment repealed? If we've got case law that's bad case law, then we ought to be fighting to overturn that case law.
That's right.
So when I had that speaking tour with the sheriff, and I realized the depth, because he carries that decision around with him to every engagement, and he reads from parts of that Supreme Court decision. If you look for it, it's categorized as the Prince versus the United States. It was Sheriff Prince and Sheriff Mack, and it got labeled the Prince decision. And when I realized that it was a 10th Amendment decision, I called the Attorney General's office back, and you know, that was months ago. It was before we were surging in the polls. It was when most people would have thought we only stood a snowball's chance, if that. And I said, you know I'm just a citizen in Texas and I'm a nurse, I'm not a legal scholar, but I know you said to me that the states hadn't been able to stand up, but I'm wondering if you know about this case, because I understand that it was a states' rights case, and when I gave him the case name, he said, oh yeah, that's a landmark case. It's been 3 or 4 years since I've read it. I said, well, would you mind taking another look? He said, yeah, I'll read it again. I said, I know the last thing you need is a nurse trying to play lawyer for the Texas Attorney General's office, but if you take a look, I really would appreciate it. I'm very concerned about this for our state. I appreciate that y'all are studying it. He said, I'll read it and I'll call you back this afternoon. And he did, and I was shocked. You know what he said? That case might be spot on. When we decide to defend Texas, we'll find a way to defend Texas.
Okay.
But we've got to be committed to that. We've got to get beyond this can't, and say, yes, we will. It is the right thing to do. It is our duty to do, and we are neglecting that sacred trust if we do not defend these ideas and these principles. And when, thank you. Arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, will be a force that they cannot stand against. And not just because we're Texas, but because Texas and Oklahoma and Arizona and Georgia are all there together. We will create independent, sovereign states. Max says we let that word sovereign just roll off of our tongue. Do you know what it means? There's no authority above us. We are a sovereign state. We have given up our authority for Article 1, Section 8 things only. Everything else is reserved to the states and the people. It's our job. So, in the early days of this campaign, recognizing how to restore a sovereign state, recognizing the tools of nullification, interposition, you may have heard me say, I think the real question is, where do we start? Are there legal precedents that prop up other intrusions into the state? And if we knock out that, I feel like, that 52 pickup sticks kind of thing, if I pull out that one, what brings down the whole stack? Do we argue in education? Do we fight in the federal court and say, the Texas Constitution says, in order that our children understand liberty, the state of Texas will provide a free public education for the general dissemination of knowledge. We don't need Washington telling us how to teach our kids. Do we start in education? Or do we start in agriculture? I know in the big city of Houston, it's hard to imagine that there are still people farming fields and raising cattle and sheep in Texas, but there's a vibrant agriculture industry in Texas. Do we start there and tell the federal government, we've been farming and ranching in Texas for a lot longer than y'all have been around. We do not need you regulating farming and ranching.
That's right.
I do know we've got an energy sector. Do we start there? Is that the place that we start? And it's that wisdom that we ought to be looking for. Get that dialogue started. Bring to the table. Part of what you saw from me in the debate was not just Debra Medina's very good research and study skills. Part of it was that wisdom from the minds of men. Because believe it or not, we've got individuals just like you who have been very concerned about the state of immigration in this state. They've been studying it, and guess what? When you ask, they'll tell you everything you want to know about what's going on with border security and immigration in Texas. And when you ask about transportation, you'll find somebody else that's been studying transportation for 20 years and they know everything you want to know. That's where stuff came from. I got some of those financial numbers that I knew about because I didn't find it on my own, but because you shared it. That's how we'll find the best direction for our state. And so as I'm asking, where do we start? A suggestion is made, you might set your sights on the EPA. And boy, it was like a light bulb that went off for me because nobody had to explain EPA's all over energy. It's all over agriculture, and it's all over manufacturing in this state. You set the Attorney General after the EPA and say, you find a way, you make an argument in federal court that there's no constitutional authority for an environmental protection agency. You get a governor, you give me a governor, and I promise you this one will, who says to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, you will enforce Texas state law and only Texas state law. You will not dance the tune whistled by Washington, D.C. and the EPA against Texas energy and Texas manufacturing. That's not to be anarchist. That's not to say energy might not need some regulating, but whose job is it to regulate Texas energy? Texas job. We're not going to let Washington, D.C. try to create one-size-fits-all legislation that works for Alaska energy providers and Louisiana energy providers and Texas energy providers. Texas will take care of Texas. I had a conversation with a farmer in Greenville, Texas, and I said, what would it mean to you and your business if we were to get the EPA out of farming in Texas?